This morning you woke to a world run by invisible code. You silenced an alarm with a swipe, paid for coffee with a tap, and walked on sidewalks pawed by strangers. All perfectly ordinary. But what if I told you that every one of these acts, from the concrete beneath your feet to the digital bits in your bank account, is a direct echo of a revolution that began 5,500 years ago? On the banks of a few rivers in what is now Iraq and Egypt, humanity made a collective decision. Scattered huts and the wandering life were over. In a historical eye blink, our ancestors invented not just cities, but writing, taxes, bosses, and the very audacity of building a tower to touch the sky. Miss this foundational chapter, and you miss the source code for our entire civilization. You'll never truly understand why you pay rent, why your boss lives by a spreadsheet, or why we still erect colossal rectangles of glass and steel in the heart of our cities. So, stay with me. We are about to witness humanity not just evolve, but level up into the world we now call our own. From mud to metropolis. For tens of thousands of years, our existence was a relentless chase. In small nomadic bands, our ancestors pursued calories across vast landscapes, following herds and gathering what nature sparsely offered. Life was a daily precarious struggle. Then, around 12,000 years ago, the planet itself exhaled. The great ice sheets retreated, the climate warmed, and wild grasses began to grow thick and sweet. Along the Tigris, Euphrates, and Nile, the rivers began to perform an annual miracle. They flooded. Not with a destructive fury, but with a predictable life-giving surge. This wasn't just water. It was a delivery of rich, fertile silt, free fertilizer that transformed barren earth into an agricultural gold mine. For the first time in human history, we could pause. We could plant a seed, wait, and watch the future grow from the ground. The results were staggering. Women could now feed their children nourishing porridge instead of carrying them across unforgiving steppes. This stability detonated a population boom. Villages of a few hundred swelled to 1,000, then 5,000. Storage pits, once a novelty, began overflowing with surplus grain. And when you have that much wealth, someone has to count the jars. And someone else inevitably has to guard them. The cozy, familiar world where everyone knew everyone else suddenly morphed into something complex and anonymous. I don't know that man, but he owes me 3 jars of barley. This was the great friction, the fundamental challenge of civilization. How do you live, trade, and trust shoulder to shoulder with thousands of strangers without descending into chaos? How do you manage resources, enforce agreements, and maintain order? This urgent, intricate problem, this need for organization on an unprecedented scale, became the very crucible in which the city was forged. It forced us to innovate systems and build the complex social architecture we still inhabit today. Mesopotamia, the beta test, imagine southern Iraq, around 3500 BCE. If civilization were a software update, Mesopotamia was the beta test, and the city of Uruk was its astonishing first release. Picture 30,000 people, a staggering figure for the era, living within mud brick walls so immense they would still command awe today. There was no instruction manual, no blueprint for running a metropolis. So they improvised with genius. Their first world-changing innovation was a network of irrigation canals. These weren't mere ditches, they were a sophisticated grid of liquid highways, meticulously engineered to divert the Euphrates and deliver water to distant fields. This system guaranteed a massive food surplus. And a surplus in Mesopotamia often led to one thing: beer. Lots of it. When you're brewing and distributing beer on an industrial scale, you need receipts. Memory is no longer enough. The solution was breathtakingly simple. Press a reed stylus into wet clay. Simple pictures, pictographs emerged. Over centuries, these pictures tilted, simplified, and morphed into the wedge-shaped script we call cuneiform. It was history's first true writing, a revolution in data management that could record everything from beer tabs to epic poetry. But city life created new frictions, disputes over land, arguments over inheritance, that one neighbor who kept borrowing your goat. The solution was to elevate one tough, fair leader from the Council of Elders. He was likely a proven warrior, a man with a strong arm and a reputation for getting things done. They called him the Lugal, the big man, a title that would evolve into king. To check his power, influential priests would remind him that the gods were the true owners of the city. His authority was conditional. The harvests had to be plentiful and the heavens pleased. It was a delicate, foundational balance of spiritual and temporal power. And finally, how do you project power and a shared identity to a largely illiterate populace? You build a mountain. A man-made one that no one could possibly ignore, the ziggurat. A colossal terraced pyramid of brick, often coated in gleaming blue glazed tiles, with a temple on top that clawed at the sky. Visible for miles across the flat plains, it was more than a temple. It was a declaration. It screamed, "Civilization lives here," louder and more enduringly than any billboard. By 2600 BCE, Gilgamesh, the legendary king of Uruk, could boast in his epic that his city was the center of the world. And he wasn't entirely wrong. Uruk, alongside cities like Ur and Eridu, had created the blueprint for urban life. Egypt, the centralized remix. While Mesopotamia was a chaotic laboratory of competing city-states, a profoundly different experiment was unfolding along the Nile. The Nile is not like the bickering Tigris and Euphrates. It is a single, majestic and predictable heartbeat, cutting a ribbon of impossible green through an unforgiving desert. This unparalleled reliability fostered a deep sense of confidence and order. Farmers could set their calendars by the annual flood, knowing with certainty when the life-giving silt would arrive. This made harvests less of a gamble and more of a guarantee, fueling an even greater and more stable population boom. Around 3150 BCE, a ruler known as Nama accomplished the unthinkable. He unified the entire 1,000-kilometer length of the Nile under a single crown. No more bickering city-states. Egypt became the world's first nation-state, with its capital at Memphis. Here, the solution to chaos wasn't competition, but absolute unity under a single radical idea. The pharaoh is not just a king representing a god. The pharaoh is a god on earth. When your ruler is divine, you don't need a dozen ziggurats for local deities. You need one eternal home for that god-king, a monument that broadcasts his divinity across eternity. Enter the pyramid. What began as modest flat-topped burial mounds called mastabas evolved with breathtaking speed. By 2580 BCE, under Pharaoh Khufu, this vision culminated in the Great Pyramid at Giza, soaring 146 meters into the sky. It was constructed not by slaves, but by a paid workforce of some 20,000 skilled laborers and farmers during the annual flood season. It is composed of 2.3 million blocks of stone, some weighing over 15 tons, cut and placed so precisely that you still cannot slide a credit card between the joints. This was no mere tomb. It was a cosmic anchor designed to ensure the pharaoh's successful journey into the afterlife and, by extension, the eternal prosperity of Egypt itself. Egypt's writing evolved differently too. hieroglyphs or sacred carvings started as pictorial labels but quickly adorned temple walls to tell the grand stories of gods and pharaohs. For practical, daily use, they were streamlined into two cursive scripts, hieratic for priests and demotic for everyday business, all written on papyrus. While Mesopotamia gave the world the durable clay tablet, Egypt pioneered the world's first paper. Together, with their distinct but equally revolutionary writing systems, these two civilizations gave the ancient world its first open-source operating system. The ability to record, store, and transmit vast amounts of information, changing humanity forever. Writing the original code. Let's zoom in on the technology that enabled this entire revolution. Writing. In Mesopotamia, a scribe, a highly trained professional, would take a reed stylus, its triangular tip not scratching, but pressing into wet clay. That single wedge-shaped impression could mean barley, one, or to receive, depending on its context. A clay tablet no larger than your phone could hold the inventory of a warehouse: 30 jars of beer, 80 lambs, 12 ounces of imported lapis lazuli. Once baked in the sun, that tablet became a virtually immortal record of law, commerce, and myth. A millennium later, the power of this invention became undeniable. Hammurabi, the king of Babylon, had 282 laws carved into a colossal black stone stele, deliberately made taller than any person. The inscription begins, "When the god Marduk commanded me to bring justice." The message was unmistakable. To break these laws was not just to defy the king, but to defy the gods themselves. This code, with its famous eye for an eye principle, established foundational precedents for contracts, property rights, and criminal justice that would echo for thousands of years. Meanwhile, on the Nile, an Egyptian scribe would dip a bruised reed brush into ink made from carbon and gum arabic and write on a sheet pressed from papyrus reeds. Unlike heavy clay, papyrus could be rolled into scrolls dozens of meters long. This portability was revolutionary. It allowed for complex medical texts, elaborate poems, property deeds, and administrative commands to be carried across the kingdom. One text, the Instruction of Tahotep, offers timeless advice to a middle manager on how to remain patient with difficult colleagues, proof that office politics are significantly older than the office itself. Whether it was the rugged permanence of Mesopotamian clay or the lightweight elegance of Egyptian papyrus, writing became the original information technology. It was the bedrock of administration, the enabler of complex economies, and the vault for human culture. It allowed ideas and laws to transcend the fragile limitations of individual memory, creating the collective consciousness that defined these first great civilizations. Power dressing and paychecks. The very nature of a city demands specialization. You can't have everyone farming. In a city like Uruk, you'd find a dizzying array of professions: the brewer concocting the daily beer ration, the potter shaping thousands of vessels, the coppersmith hammering out weapons, and the worker tasked with hauling the city's garbage to the outskirts. Everyone had a role, and everyone had to be paid. The original paycheck was a grain ration, meticulously measured in units called sila, roughly 1 liter. These payments were tracked on clay tablets. Miss a day of towing the royal barge, and the foreman would mark it down. The IRS of antiquity, it seems, had no patience for absenteeism. This wasn't just about punishment, it was about the detailed record-keeping required to run a complex, state-managed economy. In Egypt, state control was even more absolute. For projects like the pyramids, the pharaoh's administration distributed bread, beer, onions, and even linen for loincloths to the massive work crews. And what of overtime? If you count dragging a multi-ton stone block up a ramp in the desert heat, there was plenty of it. Yet graffiti found inside the Great Pyramid reveals a surprising truth. The work gangs gave themselves names like the Friends of Khufu and the Drunkards of Menkaure, suggesting a powerful sense of camaraderie, pride, and even competitive spirit. This was not the work of slaves, but of a highly organized, often voluntary workforce, motivated by civic duty and religious faith. The takeaway is profound. Whether you wore the rough wool of Sumer or the fine linen of Memphis, your daily bread depended on a bureaucrat, someone who could read, write, and keep accurate records. Literacy, therefore, became the first true superpower. It wasn't just for priests and kings, it was the essential tool for managing the intricate logistics of urban life, empowering a new class of administrators and scribes who formed the backbone of these new societies. Religion, the original network. Why did anyone agree to this new, rigid social order? Why pay taxes, obey a distant king, and perform grueling labor? Because the cosmos itself, as they understood it, demanded it. In Mesopotamia, the gods were not distant beings. They were the literal landowners of the city-state. Humans were merely their tenant farmers. If you failed to maintain the god's temple or perform the correct rituals, the divine landlords might flood your fields or send a plague of locusts. It was a direct transactional relationship, and the priests, as the god's estate managers, held immense power. Egyptian cosmology was just as powerful but more unified. Every day, the sun god Ra sailed his celestial boat across the sky, sustaining all of creation. And whose job was it to ensure that solar barge stayed on schedule and that Ma'at, divine order, truth and justice, prevailed? The pharaohs. If the sun rose, if the Nile flooded on time, it was because the pharaoh was succeeding. In this context, your taxes weren't merely a levy, they were a subscription payment to maintain the fabric of the universe. Temples in both cultures were far more than houses of worship. They were the original banks and treasuries. An offering of a goat would be recorded as a deposit, which could be withdrawn later, with interest often paid in divine favor. Great festivals synchronized society. During the New Year in Babylon, the king was ritually slapped and humiliated by the high priest before being recrowned, symbolically renewing his contract with the gods and his people. In Egypt, the spectacular Opet festival saw enormous statues of the gods paraded from Karnak to Luxor, a citywide party that reinforced national unity and shared belief. This shared cosmology, this intricate web of myths, rituals, and divine mandates, was the original social network. It was the software that glued thousands of strangers together, providing a common purpose, a shared identity, and a justification for the power structures that allowed their civilization to function. It was the story they all agreed to live inside. Trade, the first global supply chain. Southern Iraq, the cradle of Mesopotamian civilization, was an alluvial plain, incredibly fertile, but almost completely lacking in timber, stone, and metal. The solution, born from necessity, was to trade their surplus grain and textiles for the resources they lacked. This was not just local barter, it was the birth of the world's first international supply chain. Mesopotamian merchants were astonishingly intrepid, trekking thousands of kilometers with donkey caravans, armed with clay tablets serving as invoices and letters of credit. One such tablet, discovered in modern Turkey, is an exasperated complaint from nearly 4,000 years ago. A merchant named Nanny gripes that the copper ingots he received were of terrible quality. It's a powerful reminder that concepts like quality control, customer service, and legal disputes are as old as trade itself. These merchants were connecting economies, bringing tin from Afghanistan to mix with copper from Cyprus to forge bronze, and hauling obsidian from Anatolia and carnelian from the Indus Valley. Egypt, rich in Nubian gold, had its own shopping list. It traded its gold for the incense and myrrh of Punt, modern-day Eritrea, to perfume its temples, and for the massive cedar logs of Lebanon to build its ships and temple doors. The archaeological proof of this interconnected world is undeniable. Mesopotamian cylinder seals are found in Egyptian tombs, while Egyptian pottery appears in the ruins of Ur. This reveals a profound truth. Globalization isn't a modern invention of boardrooms and fiber-optic cables. It is a riverbank habit, a deeply human impulse to connect, exchange, and interact across vast distances that stretches back to the very dawn of cities. When cities stumble, civilization is never a straight line pointing upward. It's a jagged, volatile pattern of astonishing growth and devastating collapse. Around 2200 BCE, a prolonged severe drought, what climatologists now call a mega-drought, possibly linked to shifts in ocean currents, gripped the Near East. The fertile fields turned to dust. The consequences were catastrophic. In Mesopotamia, cities that had swelled with people began to starve. The authority of kings evaporated when they could no longer guarantee the harvest. The Akkadian Empire, history's first empire, which had briefly unified the region under Sargon the Great, shattered violently back into warring city-states, each fighting for scraps. Egyptian records from this same era, the first intermediate period, paint an equally grim portrait of chaos. They speak of famine, civil war, and desperate tomb robbing as the social order disintegrated. The centralized power of the pharaoh, once absolute, crumbled. The lesson is stark and timeless. Every urban miracle, every pyramid and ziggurat rests on a fragile foundation of predictable rains, reliable rivers, and the willingness of farmers to work the soil. When these fundamentals break, society itself teeters on the brink of collapse. It's a lesson in humility, a reminder that even the most complex civilizations are profoundly vulnerable to the forces of nature, a truth that every modern megacity, with its intricate dependencies, would do well to remember. The echo today. Why should any of this matter to you now? Because you are living inside their world. The 60-second minute and 60-minute hour that structure your day were not an arbitrary choice. They are the direct legacy of Mesopotamian scribes who used a base 60 mathematical system to map the heavens. The 365-day solar calendar that populates your phone was perfected by Egyptian astronomers and, with a minor tweak by Julius Caesar, remains the system we use today. Every legal contract you sign is a descendant of those laws carved on stone and recorded on papyrus. Every skyscraper that pierces the clouds is a modern ziggurat, a testament to our ongoing ambition to stack functions vertically and build symbolic monuments to our own power. Even the word paradise comes to us from the Old Persian peridaiza, meaning a walled garden. The exact concept of an ordered, cultivated space that defined the courtyards of Sumerian palaces, a man-made oasis against the chaos of the outside world. We are not merely downstream from these ancient peoples, we are running on their firmware. Their breakthroughs in law, mathematics, engineering, and social organization form the invisible operating system of modern life. From how we measure time to how we structure our laws, the fingerprints of Mesopotamia and Egypt are everywhere. They are not historical footnotes. They are the foundational pillars upon which our entire world is built. If you're finding this journey into our urban origins as fascinating as I do, take a second to tap the like button. That small click tells the algorithm that these deep stories matter, helping more people discover them. And to continue exploring how the ancient world invented our present, hit subscribe and ring that notification bell. Next week, we're tracking how writing leaped from accounting ledgers to the minds of poets, giving birth to the world's first epic blockbuster, the story of Gilgamesh, the original buddy road trip saga, complete with monsters, meddling gods, and a tragic quest for eternal life. You won't want to miss it. Walking the streets again. Let's step back one last time. Imagine dawn in Uruk. The sky over the ziggurat is a deep, bruised purple. The air begins to fill with the smell of baking bread as bakers slide barley loaves into clay ovens. A lone priest, his torch a flickering star, ascends the massive staircase to greet the sun and perform the rites that ensure the city's survival. Downriver in Memphis, the Nile laps against the whitewashed walls of enormous granaries. Inside, a scribe dips his reed brush in ink, his hand moving in a steady rhythm as he records the previous day's grain haul, every measure accounted for. In a dusty side street, children laugh as they play a game of hounds and jackals, its carved pieces uncannily familiar. These were not statues or abstract figures in a textbook. They were real people. They loved, they worried about the harvest, they dreamed under the same stars that we see. Their wild experiment, this radical bet on crowding together, trusting strangers and building something for tomorrow, it worked. It worked often enough and well enough that we, 5 millennia later, still pack ourselves into stadiums, squeeze into subways, and stand in line for coffee. The city didn't just change where we live. It fundamentally rewired who we are. It turned us from scattered bands of hunters into a single, restless, endlessly innovative species. The takeaway. So the next time you find yourself navigating a traffic jam, cursing bureaucracy, or just gazing up at a skyline, remember, you are not outside of history. You are living in the longest-running sequel ever told. Mesopotamia gave us the script, writing, law, and the sheer audacity of urban ambition. Egypt gave us the spectacle, divine monarchy, monuments that conquer time, and the dream of eternity. Together, these two civilizations didn't just lay the groundwork for our world, they handed us the keys to the city. Hold them wisely. Because the story, our story, is still being written, one commute, one contract, one shared glance on a crowded street at a time.